two ago that was digging into how comics are helping like middle grade readers read more, and it was a pretty significant jump. And I thought that was notable. I think middle grade is also one of the smaller groups of like comics that are being created. Like it's relatively there aren't nearly as many like middle grade kind of comics as like adult comics. But it is a space where it's helping like younger kids like I don't know, feel more connected with reading and feel more interested in reading, and now they're reading more. So I was about to have that piece.
So when I really think about comics as medium, right? So the professor in me has to kind of go back historically, right? And I love what you said about the meshing of, you know, written language with the graphical image to kind of reinforce. And when we think kind of historically, right, the first thing that might come to mind are maybe hieroglyphs, or maybe sometimes the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? And that is us as a civilization, just as people wanting to preserve some of this mythology, some of these great stories of old, right? Things that pass down different morals and traditions, or just different points in history that we want to make sure are not forgotten. Like sometimes we have like, right, the Pharaoh's Needle, and just different things in Mayan and Incan culture, right, that combine trying to pass down the written word, and also pottery and stuff like that in many different cultures. The written word with the image to really help us remember our history. Right? And that was our way of like preserving, right? But also when we think about comics and we think about the stories and the legends that definitely persevere, you know, there's also the ideal of, you know, who we want to be or who we aspire to be. What we believe, I guess, is heroic and who our fantasies are. And if we could be boundless, you know, what would we do? How could we solve this problem? Kind of in these different ways if we had the power to really, you know, help our communities or our society. And so I think in many ways it reflects, you know, a lot about humanity comics do. But I also think when we look at all the different mediums that we have to tell stories, I mean, of course, things like the printing press, radio, television, all these things revolutionized the way that we communicate as humans. But they each have a special place, and often they all reinforce one another. So when we think about Star Wars, right, you have film, you have cartoons, you have comics, you have novels, and all of these things work to really reinforce your experiences in different ways, and especially when it comes to video gaming, right? That's a different way. Now you're walking through, right, issues and able to like move and command the character and look around like this, right, instead of always having the story kind of told to you. So all these different ways of experiencing help reinforce these worlds and reinforce the values and the stories that they're designed to tell.
Yeah, it's like for me, as far as what really makes them kind of stand out uniquely to me, because to me it feels like I'm, as a reader, part of the collaborative process. Because it really feels as if a comic book isn't finished until I'm filling in what happens between those panels, whether I'm thinking about it or not. And plus, I also really like the fact that, I mean, aside from the people who are editors and all that kind of stuff, here's a little group of people who are in charge of that story, and I seem to be part of it. And to me, that's always, and plus the amount of fan interaction that comics have always had with with the letters pages and things like that. So that's always really felt why I felt comics were unique, even as a little kid. It's like, I can't give feedback to a movie. I can't give feedback to, well, you can now with the internet, but way back when, you could write a letter in and they could respond to it, and that was always really cool.
It's always a delight when, you know, like, someone will dig up, you know, like some now famous cartoonist, like they dig up their, you know, fan page letter from 20, 30 years ago, and just like showing that direct lineage. I always love that.
Yeah, and then you think, well, wow, I wonder if them being published, their letter being published, helped keep them going to want to be in the medium. Well, so that's always.
So one thing that I kind of forgot to say that I loved as a kid, so when we looked at the arts and the different art styles of the different artists that drew, right, it sets this different world for you, right, and that gets to be like the baseline of the graphics. But I think what comic books do super well is they also allow your imagination just to really enter that universe, kind of like in its own way, sort of guided by you. But I think it really helps not only expand the imaginations, especially when you're a little kid, right? There's so much that you can do. It's so you might even like have them speaking, their speaking voice, right? Sound a certain way in your mind, right? And it's just amazing to you. And somebody else has like a different maybe speaking cadence or voice or how they sound, right? And we can all have our own ideas and kind of like be a part of that art and that experience. You know, I remember like for the Fallout games, when we went from Fallout 2 to Fallout 3, we had the unvoiced protagonist, and then we had the voiced protagonist. And that for many people was just so jarring because you had in your mind your idea of this is the lone warrior, my lone warrior, this is how I am and how I interact, this is how I put the phrasing or how like my tone was when I act, you know, when I did this in my mind. And then here you are in the video game with the voice, and it really changes it. Of course, it's a different experience, but it kind of, I think the comic books really help the imagination development and almost preservation. I think, you know, people who enjoy comic books through adulthood are just more curious and just more imaginative and more comfortable in that space. Many professionals say that they're creator, that they value creativity, then they go to work and they don't want to do anything creative. They just want to do what everybody else has done and that's what they want. But I think people who truly are creative, and especially people who are comic book fans, I think that stays with you throughout your life, throughout your career.
It's actually funny to talk about the different like art styles. It's something that always stuck out to me. One of the books I have is Thor: Blood and Thunder, but it goes across a series of Thor arcs, but also some Doctor Strange and some Adam, like it was the Infinity Watch, but also the Warlock Chronicles, and each one of them had a different art style. And so when you actually read all the different issues from each one all together in the book, you will switch from like you'll have Thor look one way in one art style, and then in this whole other world, from this other perspective, the art style would change. And I love that. It was so cool to me kind of to see that the very kind of nature of the reality itself would be shifted a little bit between perspectives. And it's something that I like, that definitely is also carried over into my own storytelling. I'll have a character who's more or less the same kind of character in like multiple stories, but my visual context of it, because of the nature of the story, will be different. So if you were to like, in my head, if I would like put them, even though they have like similar backstory or similar skill sets, put them together, they visually look like different realities, and it's kind of a neat thing that I definitely got from comics.
And I'm so vibing with you. So my Pointer Sisters game, one of the things about their music is that they were so genre shifting. Like in a single song, it could start country, in the middle it would just hard rock and roll, and the end would be blues and jazz. And you'd be like, what is this, right? But it was just this amazing surprise. But yeah, and so the video game that I'm making, the art style shifts, the animation shifts, right? Even like the genre and what you're doing shifts and changes according to the song, right? To really enhance and bring that part of it out. And yeah, you can say a lot of that had its foundations in comics, right? With all of the different artists who might even do a run on like Spider-Man, for instance, right? And how each of them is different, like tonality or tonally, because of the different artists and what they brought to it.
Yeah, then when you see a character that happens to like guest star in another book, you see a different art style, a different way of storytelling, a different, it's like this, you generally, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to follow this character. It's like, oh, well, so-and-so is now over here, and wow, I don't know if I like how that art is portrayed, so I'm not, or it's like, wow, this is a whole new thing, and now I need to dive into this too. And so comics is just this big, giant, or can be, depending on which kind of comics you're reading, this big giant world. But it's also wonderful that it can tell such a small, compact, deeply personal story in any type of comic adaptation, whether it be a comic strip or a self-published book or a Marvel or DC book. The versatility that comics seem to have more than most other media. In my opinion, not that I don't like other media, that seems to make that such a unique thing.
That's so true. I think many other media, right, it takes so much more resources to do it, right? Like to make a video game, right, and you put that same character in a different art style, it takes you maybe 3 to 5 years, or right, to put that together to bring that to life because of how resource intensive it is. And like even with movies, right, you need a bigger budget, you need the actors, you need all these things, you need editing going on. With comic books, you can put that vision out so much faster.
Yeah, it's like you can go from a street scene in New York to the opposite side of the galaxy in a page. Now, the artist might be really irritated by that. Because it's like, you want me to draw how many aliens?
No, it's like even from
but
one
it
line to
can be
another, like
done.
even from like Frank Miller's Batman, right, to like to a different Batman. Like you can have one Batman one year, right, and then you can have like a Batman Beyond, right, kind of like the next year, without it being so resource heavy where you have to wait so long in between the new story or in between seeing this person in the new kind of art style. I guess what I was trying to say.
Anyone want to jump in on anything else? No? See. So, well, one example of thing that comics has been brought up, I'm sure, several different times as far as what makes comics unique, the Watchmen series, how it was able to basically put a bunch of different media inside the one media to tell a full story. You had comics, you had a comic within a comic, you had prose. Are there any other examples that you could think of right off your head that just made this like, this is comics, this is what makes comics?
I think actually something that I just picked up something that's called Bitterroot, and it's like kind of like it has like a kind of a Hellboy look to it, but it is about a family that goes around and also monster hunting, but they're going so to like cure them of whatever turned them into monsters, and it derives a lot of like from the practices of like hoodoo and African root work and mixed into like a kind of like cool steampunky science type of vibe. And usually whenever I see like representation of like non-Western culture or something, or it tends to show up in comic books first, because it's a much easier medium to like, I want to tell a story, I need to be able to write words and either draw pictures or have someone I know who can draw pictures. And I think comics and their ability to kind of be outside of cultural norms because of the accessibility of them, of being able to produce them, is something that really makes them like stand out. It typically takes because of the resource intensiveness, it usually takes a lot more to get a movie or a TV show to be produced. And books, just by themselves, without visuals, can be a little bit ambiguous. Heinlein used to as a game would often like have characters who he wouldn't mention their ethnicity till like towards the end of the book, which would then like completely upend how you might have perceived a particular character, of not knowing that they were African or Puerto Rican like until the very, very end. But with comics, you have like, oh, you know who they are right from the start. You can see them. You automatically have that framework, and can't necessarily like pretend it's not there. But I think that's something that cultural accessibility, I think, of comics is something that sticks out for me. It makes them unique.
Yeah, it makes it you have to address those things right away, and that makes the framework of the story just different than any other than like a novel.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the silent issue of Hawkeye earlier, and I think that's. I think that's a great example of sort of the immediacy that a comic can have of really immersing you in the experience of a character, even if it's not like a first-person experience like a video game is, although comics can be first-person as well. There was an issue of Nightwing last year, the year before, that was done like you were looking through his eyes. I think it was the 100th issue.
I'm gonna have to find that one. That sounds awesome.
I think it went nicer. For anyone who's not familiar with the Hawkeye issue, the main character is temporarily completely deaf, but has not gone through the world living as deaf since he was a child, and so he's experiencing the world where, you know, anyone whose lips he can't read, the speech balloons don't have anything in them because functionally he has no idea what they're saying. And then there's sort of rudimentary sign language because it's not something that he's been using regularly. And so it puts you as the reader in the position where, you know, you also, if he can't hear it, you can't hear it. And if you don't know sign language, then you just sort of have to interpret from context clues what the characters are communicating because there aren't any sort of translation mechanics like there sometimes are in comics. And it's very deliberately putting the reader in this position of being sort of cut off from communication. I always love, I think that's just such a stellar example of, you know, how to really communicate a deeply personal experience that would be harder to communicate just through words, and even through something like a live action TV movie.
I love that, and I wish I could. I'm gonna have to find that one because that sounds like a really interesting read. I think the one thing, so it's not unique to any like particular comic, but the one thing I think that is unique to comics is lettering.
Yes.
And I think it is probably my favorite part of comics. And I am I'm a writer and an artist and a designer and all these different things. And I think lettering it fills, as a letterer, you're kind of a writer and an artist and a designer and all these things all in just this one role. And I think it's this beautiful combination of being able to like use design in a visual way to enhance the storytelling that I think is very unique to comics and also just like pure joy to make, from my opinion. I mean, it's also like my favorite part of comics. And there's some really great examples that I've seen where I mean like the artist is beautiful and the coloring is beautiful, and then they've used you know, letters that are like to help convey, I mean, kind of like with the comic that you mentioned too, to help convey like different aspects of the emotion and the mood, and kind of put you in their shoes a little bit more. But it's this kind of beautiful combination of like writing and lettering and writing, art and design and all these things, and just this in what I think you can think of as just words, but it's so much more. It's just a beautiful thing that's very unique to comics.
The lettering in speech bubbles and the sound effects and all those things combined. But yeah, there's a lot of really great examples of when you see that text look different, you know that character sounds different. This character is ethereal because how these letters look, and you can just imagine that in your mind. Yeah.
I feel like lettering is one of the most underrated parts of comics for sure.
I try to get even judges and lawyers to understand how important typeface and fonts are, just to making the law more accessible for other people, to make it easier for people to like read it. But no, so they said amazing things, and so I actually want to go back to something that we said a little bit previously, and that's just to highlight literacy and just how we cannot even downplay how amazing comic books are for helping young kids learn how to read. I know there's an amazing organization here in the Twin Cities called Planting People Growing Justice, and they're devoted to helping improve the literacy rates of Black and brown kids around the Twin Cities. Unfortunately, I think like the stats here are abysmal. Like 1 in 4 kids in the Twin Cities, if they're Black and brown youth, are not literate, right? And we have to change that, and I think comic books are a great medium to do so. And I know in St. Cloud, they had an amazing program where they actually partnered with Marvel Studios, and I think it was like St. Cloud Museum, or the historical, or something like that. And they went to the schools, they got a bunch of kids, and they actually walked the kids through the process of making their own comic book character. So they got to like design the comic book character with people from Marvel, right? And then like once they kind of had their character designed, they got to write out a character sheet, and the museum actually displayed it as an exhibit. And so that was just an amazing boost for those kids. And I just want to so when we talk about how comic books just make things more accessible for people to share their imaginations and just the literacy for kids, like those things are fundamental. And that's something that like comic books really has unlocked. That this is something that can be done manually, right? You don't even need a bunch of hardcore technology in order for kids to get in, create comic book characters, start imagining, start writing, start drawing, and all that fun stuff.
Because even if you can't draw well, you can still draw a stick figure and still tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, look at XKCD. It's one of the most popular webcomics of all time.
Exactly, right, exactly. Or look at Rob Liefeld. Or no. Yeah, like I mentioned, for me, it sure helped my vocabulary growing up. It gave me a sense of world culture, especially X-Men. It's like I learned foreign language words from Colossus and Nightcrawler, and I was like, it was just like, oh wow, I'm learning stuff, and this art appreciation, so many other things. I was like, I wanted to read Dante's Inferno when I was 9 years old because they adapted it into an X-Men book.
Oh, nice.
I didn't read it when I was 9 years old. I want to emphasize that, but it made me want to. Yeah, we could take some questions as we go along. Did you have something to say, by the way?
There's like 70s like Marvel comics, like they really like a wide, like they loved the catharsis. Like there were like so many different like words I had not seen in like describing like what was happening while Black Panther was fighting this dinosaur. And it's like I did not know that was another word for like kicking something in the head, but apparently that is pretty dang neat. And actually, there's also a thing they did, like particularly in like the Jungle Action books, where like they would give these fairly like starting each issue with like a bit of like a lengthy kind of like just like quote from a book or a quote from a particular book or a novel that kind of related to the theme. And I was like, that's really neat. Because I read that story actually a little bit like later on, because I'd read later Marvel comics, like Black Panther comics before that, and it was like these are neat little like fun like literary quotes that was put into to contextualize whatever issue was going on. I was like, I love this.
The Blue Star.
Yeah. Being a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan, I was really heartened when the series ended that it was converted into a comic book. Mm-hmm. And I'm also a fan of this comic. It's not running now. Nina Blake, Vampire Hunter. I wish that had been converted into a TV series or reinterpreted as a TV series. I wonder if you have any ideas as to what current TV shows you think would make sense to convert into a comic format, and what comics that have already been converted into TV would make sense to convert into a TV format, and why?
I can start, because I know right off the bat, because I wish it was a comic book. So Netflix has, some original series, and they have some original anime series, and I also am a huge anime fan. Like Berserk is like my favorite. Anyway, and Demon Slayer. But there's one, Record of Ragnarok, right? And it's basically a series of, it's like gods versus like the greatest of mankind going at it, and the Valkyries are kind of supporting mankind. It's really cool, but it's really epic, and I was like, that would be so cool as a comic book. So that's one. And another one was Blue-Eyed Samurai. And so this was a samurai who's a female samurai who basically dresses as male as she goes across her journeys. And I just thought that would work really well also as a comic book and really kind of expand it out and give us more. I wanted more of that universe.
I really think anything where you would like to have more story, but producing more of a TV show isn't as functional. When the Buffy and Angel comics came out, it's this makes perfect sense. They wanted to tell a bit more story, and that's a really great medium for it. There's also there's a Stargate SG-1 comic book series that I have a few issues of that I really enjoyed. I really like comics that are attached to a show, particularly because it gives you the ability to expand on world lore that you may not necessarily have the time to get into during your time slot of a TV series. So having that, I think is just a really, really neat, and if they want to spend on a comic book, as long as the show itself has not run for 80 bajillion seasons and probably needs to have some rest, then yeah, we should probably get a comic book.
A show that I watched that I just came to recently, belatedly after everyone else watched it, is Russian Doll. And I feel like that
Yeah, I've
could be
heard
really
good
fun.
things.
I think for me, I'm struggling to think of like a TV series, but I can think of several video games that I would really like to actually like see more in comic book form. And I was thinking of, I know they've actually made comic books of Warframe, which I played for a long time. I'm currently obsessed with Clair Obscure Expedition 33, which is, I know it's like brand new. I would absolutely read comics in that world, which is also all about storytelling. So it's kind of a cool mix, I guess. So I can think of like several video games actually that after you've gotten to like play in the world itself, get to see more.
Completely forgot. If anyone remembers a TV show that was on Fox called Mantis,
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
that needs a comic book. And you could even specifically do a comic book of the original pilot that had a slightly different premise to it, but was really, really cool. They didn't expand on it. I want a comic book of that. I want like.
And I actually know Carl Lumley, he played the Mantis in
Yeah.
Mantis. Yeah, he's one of my mentor's brother. Yeah, so it's really cool.
Very cool. It's like I personally can't think of any right now, and then I realize how little mainstream regular TV I watch right now. But I know one that I thought did it really well was the Young Justice cartoon and comic book tie-in for that. It was so. I mean, there's timestamps, so you know exactly where each issue of of the comic fell within the cartoon. So it was the same writer that dealt with the comics and the cartoon. So he's like, nope, this is going to go here, this is going to go here, this is going to go here. Things referenced each other, and it was just done so well.
Work for the House of Zod. For the house. It's a terrible song, but it's stuck in my head because, like, when you have enough, like, gall to like have your Phantom Zone compatriots like make a little like song to you as they're like building with Phantom Rocks. Like, okay, yeah, it's stuck in my head now. Their audacity is like got me hooked.
Okay, Pink X.
Related question, what webcomics would you like to see adapted for television, film, other medium?
I will say, I could start there. So one of my things that I kind of didn't get to, I think, probably with the next question, is when I grew up, I loved comics. I loved them a lot, right? But I didn't feel very represented in comics, right? So like, I love the X-Men and pretty much Storm, right? Sometimes when I go and I talk with students and I tell them about my company and I say, hey, can you guys name a black female superhero besides Storm, right? Generally, sometimes they can come up with one, but generally that gets a long pause and proves my entire point for me. And so what I decided to do, because I was just so sick of it, and I love anime, and really no black women in anime either, right? And I think like we're great for like, have you seen black women hairstyles from the 80s? Like they are anime ready, okay? Like they're ready, they're on deck. And so one thing that I try to do is like for my Pointer Sisters game specifically, I want to have an actual anime film tie-in, because I'm like, it's already the hairstyles there, and like just, there's already 4 of them, they're all different character classes, like they're ready for a journey, let's go do this, right? And so for me, when it comes to things that I kind of want to see from like comics or whatever, I want to see more black women in the space, making comic books, that reflect us, right? And giving us some new superheroes kind of made authentically by us. And I kind of want to jump into the anime scene because that's like my jam. But for other people, that something else might be their jam. And so, yeah, I just kind of want some representation increased across superheroes, anime. And I want those things to become comic books and movies and make it a whole universe.
The first web kind of thing that came to my mind was the beings. Those little blue people. They talk differently. It's not your part. It's your it's your.
Strange Planet.
Yes. Yeah. I couldn't remember what it was called. I'm like, that would make such a wonderful animated show.
Very funny. It would make like good little animated shorts, I think. Like Cartoon Network, like little interstitials between the actual shows.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really read like sort of long form narrative webcomics these days. Like most of the ones that I read are more like, you know, short form gag type webcomics. So like I don't,
XKCD and
yeah, so I don't really have a good example. But if I had to guess, like what would be the first like popular in the U.S. webcomic to get a series, my guess would be Laura Olympus. Like it's only a matter of time.
I've just been reading that through like book 8. I'm reading the print form of it. I can absolutely see that going to screen.
Hashtag.
Okay, so plug a podcast. Is everyone familiar with Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men?
What was the title?
Jay and Miles Explain the X-Men.
Oh, I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
Because Jay used to be well, she still is the comic book editor, and then Miles is just kind of the glorious fanboy. But because of that, Jay kind of talks about the industry a bit. He looks about Marvel when they're going through the X-Men comics. They're like in the early 2000s right now. They've been going for like 10 years. But I was kind of thinking when you're talking about lettering, there's this one time when Jay was talking about how in the 90s he had the Sandman series, which did the lettering to different characters very, very well.
Yes.
So it showed you like something about that character, how the lettering. But then that kind of caused a lot of copycat in the 90s where it's kind of being overused. When it was kind of this weird lettering, which is like just a be weird lettering as opposed to. So would you say that sometimes less is more? Especially if you're trying to do something different.
I think frequently in anything related to design, less is more. I do think it's something. I think lettering in particular is something that I think feels very accessible to a lot of people, but is very noticeable when it's done badly, and it negatively impacts the story.
Exactly. I was just about to say that in that book in particular, it took me a while before it registered in my head, but it was like I didn't really like make a conscious notice of it until like much later. I'm like, oh wait a minute, that's why they all sound different in my head, because the lettering is.
Yeah, I frequently compare lettering to editing because in both cases, not all the time, but very often if they're done well, you sort of don't notice anything has been done at all. That's less universally the case with lettering, of course, because sometimes you do want it to be very noticeable. But if it feels just naturally integrated most of the time, it really immerses you. And then when you want that big wow factor of the really like attention-calling lettering, then it has something to stand out against. That's definitely one of my, I guess, pet peeves is when I'm reading a story and the lettering style just doesn't feel like it meshes with the story. Like the style just doesn't quite fit. It just kind of feels like it's floating on top. And sometimes that's down to, you know, workflow and deadlines and, you know, the letterer didn't have access to the final colors. But when it's really just everything is meshing together, that's, I feel like, where the magic kind of happens.
I do think on less is more too. I think as a concept, I think what that's really saying is intent is important, and I think that's what you see when it's not intentional. If you're just putting the words there and they're just there. I mean, they're there. I guess you can read them, but when it's intentional, and when the design decisions are intentional, I think that makes a huge difference. It has to have a reason.
So even if you're doing something almost purposefully to make it harder for the reader to make it through, right? That should have also a reason that ties in with the story. And then it just emphasizes it and it brings it out even more.
Yeah, pink hashtag.
A couple of points. To what Lathan said about Marvel Comics in the 70s being, you know, expansive and complicated story points. I grew up with the Marvel Comics of the 60s. Stan Lee was a frustrated wannabe novelist.
Yes.
He kept the last name Lieber because that was going to be for the great American novel he was going to write. So, consequently, he stole stuff and put it in his comics. People read it, especially college kids, and it started to take off. Then he hires Roy Thomas, who had been an English teacher, I think, school English teacher, and he stole stuff, but at least he attributed it in the stuff that he wrote, and ever since then, they were hiring people who were very literate, and people who were writing fill-ins at Marvel in the 60s went back to DC doing hack work. And so that kind of was the separation point between the two big companies. A point that Jules made, I want to kind of flip it on its ear about comics being an educational tool for literacy. I had a girlfriend once who was a voracious reader, loved mysteries. She wore out library cards because it's like, I read this book, why should I own it? I know how it works, or what happens. So I started trying to get her to read comics, and she'd take a graphic novel and she'd be done like half an hour. Okay, no, didn't you know? Look at the art? No, I just read the story. So the idea of reading comics is only part of the comic experience. So I've been trying to search for decades what a better term would be for how somebody would consume comics, not only the words, the lettering, the art, and the inking as well, because that can make or break a penciler's work. And so how, if you come up with that word and give it a year's time, and you see me in the hall, come and grab me and tell me, okay?
Consume is not a bad term, but
It has that connotation of like, we're all consumers, and that type
imbibe.
that type of thing. So, and experiencing comics, well, that's like, you go and see a movie in 3D IMAX. It's not just watching a movie, you experience it. Well, yes and no. I also saw
You do experience it.
Yeah.
They may want to use a term some way that you might think is cheesy, but experience is still a good word on just or what it means. In the law, we have a term totality of the circumstances, right? So, and that just means like taking in all the things kind of at one time and looking at them all.
Well, maybe it's a phrase we need, the totality of
contextualization.
Commenting.
I don't think
I
fourth
think we're
grade
determined to figure this out tonight.
Just make it a verb.
Just throwing that out.
Man, you didn't say what grade level they had to be.
Add ing to it. Make it to a verb. Back to the panel.
So we have about 10 minutes left. It's kind of flown by here. So I want to make sure you guys have time to give any final thoughts. Anything else you have going on for the rest of the con? Anything else you want to say about this in particular? How you, I suppose, possibly even how you decided to get into, starting to get into the work is being part of actual comics, and what led you to that, and all of you, and how you decided to start studying, how you decided to start studying everything.
I really started studying, I would say, comics. It was when I read Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth, and then The Hero's Journey. So many stories are really based upon those, right? The Threshold Guardians and all the things, right? He was basically this anthropologist that took in all the myths and legends from history and found, the kind of commonality of the story path that they have. And there's many awesome and successful stories that do follow his storyline. But that really got me looking into not only the structures of stories, right? The purpose of stories. So one thing I didn't mention is I also went to seminary and I have a theology degree. And so one of the things that I just loved when I was in theology is that, we also studied the Quran, and we also looked at the Hindu Vedas. And so it was great to read things to just understand, what are the information that's contained here that I've never read before, that I'm saying that I either believe or don't believe. But I just enjoy learning what people believe and why they believed it. And then I also enjoy seeing how many of those things are connected and very much related. And similar to Joseph Campbell, right? How the similarities there really do tell kind of their own story and give you your own pathway. So I think it's...
Yeah, I think jumping off that a little bit, sort of my day job is in communications, so when you said you're trying to get lawyers to like use bold like formatting and stuff, I was like, yes.
Right for humans.
Yeah. So I do think comics is such a unique creation space where you're telling stories and you're communicating with people. And I think what brought me into it as a creator was the challenge of being able to use all these skills to like tell a story, to tell a cohesive story. But I think, and we've touched on it a little bit with that collaboration. And I think that the collaboration piece honestly takes, from my perspective, takes like the creation of comics to like a whole other level. I think as a creator, working with the first short comic I have out, it's an anthology that was funded successfully on Kickstarter. I was the writer, and I worked with 3 other people to create the comic. And I'm capable of drawing them. I'm capable of lettering, but the energy. We weren't like working in the same space. Like we were like emailing each other back. We were communicating like through Discord to like work through these pages and do like a little bit of problem solving as we were going through it. And the energy of being in any space with multiple creators working on something to tell a story is just like a whole different kind of energy. I think it's every time I get a chance to collaborate with someone, it increases my love of comics as a medium, because it's a really, really, I think, beautiful thing getting to work with each other and kind of toss ideas back and forth and see different perspectives on something when you have like a particular vision in your mind and getting to see someone else's perspective. And oftentimes it's better, frankly, than the vision I had, just getting like a different take on, or something was missing and the interpretation was missing, then we have an opportunity to fix it. So having that kind of collaborative energy is it's a magical thing that sustains me, I think, in this space.
I started out on the prose side. I worked in-house as an editor at a nonfiction book publisher before going freelance. And comics was always one of the things that I was interested in getting into. And I happened to be mutuals on Twitter with the head of proofreading at DC back when Twitter was still an okay place. And they had an opening for more freelancers in their pool. And so I literally slid into her DMs, and that was how I started proofreading for DC. And then after I had been working with them for a few years, then I had the opportunity to do a temporary in-house gig with them for about 6 months when that head of proofreading went on leave. And so that was about as good as a finishing school for comics proofreading as you could ask for. And yeah, it's publishing in general is one of those things where it is a little bit opaque from the outside in terms of how you go about getting into it, and there aren't specific degrees or training programs, even if there is education out there. And comics even more so. It operates so much on tradition rather than on formal education or anything like that, which is one of the great things, but it's also one of the challenging things about comics. But yeah, that was how I got involved.
So I started when I got into school. I studied a lot of social anthropology, a lot of culture and mythology, comparative mythology and whatnot. So seeing how those kind of translated in whenever I read comics, kind of like the kind of same similar narrative was really interesting for me. And I just kind of read a lot of different things. Like I find what's really in comics, pick a character, pick a story, pick a particular little world, and poke around it. Like DC, Marvel Comics, IDW, just Dark Horse stuff. Just find something that sounds interesting and just kind of see where it kind of takes you. And it's something where it's there's so many different things and so many different expressions, so many different types of there's at least some story that you're going to probably resonate with very, very strongly, and probably a whole bunch of different ones. So yeah, that's kind of just go out, read stuff, or comic stuff.
Yeah, I love the big two, but there is such a big wide world out there.
We have 2 minutes left. Green circle.
So I think some of the a lot of the appeal of comics, and probably part of the reason that it has gotten so much bigger, is kind of takes a lot of different things that you all have been saying. Is there are so many different worlds and so many different. There's so much more representation of all types of people and cultures and things like that. Like you were saying about how it's a little easier to do some of that because there isn't as much time and production and everything involved. And I think one of the big strengths of comic books is, like with the X-Men and the mutants and the whole outsider. That there's so many of us who finally see ourselves somewhere, that we've found a place where we fit in when we don't often fit in the real world. So I think that's a big part of the appeal. And just as kind of as a scientist myself, one of the things that I was thinking about is with all of the different art styles and all the different authors that have done all of the different versions of all of different superheroes and things like that. I wonder if that has had any impact on like the younger generations and how they seem to be a little bit more open-minded about a lot of stuff. Just kind of curious about that. Would be interesting to see if somebody.
We are kind of at time right now, but one of the things that I didn't really get a chance to ask was, so we can just kind of do a real quick yes or no with a sentence maybe afterward, is how do we think comics are going to thrive as a medium going forward?
I think they're going to be, they're more resilient than I think given credit for, but there's definitely the more involvement that we all have in terms of like being involved in like buying comics and contributing to like the production of comics, to like including stories, the better off. Because I feel like there's a good amount of like other economic forces that make it much harder for comics to really thrive.
Yeah, I mean, people have been making comics or comic-like things for hundreds of years, and I don't think Diamond going into bankruptcy or any number of other sort of industry challenges are ever going to stop that. People, if nothing else, are going to continue to make comics for free as they do now. But there are certainly going to be challenges in the immediate future, just as there have been challenges in the past. So, what kind of shape the formal industry is going to be in the near future, who can say? But I'm certainly not worried for like the existence of the medium.
Yeah, I agree. I think as a storytelling medium, I don't think it's going anywhere. I do think, and we didn't really touch on challenges within comics too much. I'm for a while I've been of the opinion that most comic creators are way underpaid. Maybe once you get into some of the larger publishing, I think it's a little maybe marginally tiny bit better.
Publishing is a very low-paid industry, and comics is low-paid within within publishing.
Like there's when I was learning how to make comics, they were like, we finished the class and be like, so as a line artist or as a letterer, like how much do you expect to make per page? And it's low. I mean, you're usually making like less than $10 an hour, assuming a range of hours, for an immense amount of work that someone reads in like 20 minutes. So like I think there's some real issues that are making it hard to be sustainable outside of the passion people have for comics, and I think that's probably a whole other panel that could go into that. But I think as a medium, it's probably gonna stick around. I think it has a lot of longevity and a lot of like energy and passion behind it. I just want to see more care for the artists and creators and kind of the industry as a whole.
My answer is hell yeah. I mean, as long as people have imaginations, we have something that we can write with or share our imagination with, and the canvas of which to paint or to whatever. comic books will be here. Yes, absolutely, right? Or at least the form of telling the story and, you know, supporting it with an image and vice versa. That will always be around.
Okay, well that is definitely our time. Thank you all very much for showing up. Thank you all for being here and talking. If any of you want to say where else you may be for the rest of Con, go right ahead. Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.